The white officer pressed Dr. Naomi Carter against the hood of his cruiser before he ever asked for her name. Behind her, a frightened young woman kept saying the same 4 words, "She saved my life." But Officer Grant Mercer did not listen. He tightened the handcuffs around Naomi's wrists, looked at the elegant black woman in the torn evening gown, and announced to the gathering crowd that she was under arrest for kidnapping. What he did not know was that Naomi owned the company whose security team had tried to abduct her employee. He did not know she had once led Navy rescue missions in places he had only seen on maps. And he certainly did not know that the body camera recording his every word was about to become the first piece of evidence in a federal case that would reach from a lonely South Carolina highway to the top floor of a billion-dollar corporation. Less than 6 hours later, Mercer would stand outside Naomi's boardroom and finally understand that he had not stopped a criminal. He had delivered the last witness she needed. The trouble began at the Harbor Crest Hotel on a warm October night, where 200 guests had gathered beneath crystal chandeliers for the annual foundation dinner of Carter Maritime Systems. Beyond the ballroom windows, Charleston Harbor lay black and quiet beneath the moon. Inside, silverware shone, a string quartet played near the eastern wall, and men who measured their lives in contracts and quarterly reports spoke softly over glasses of sparkling water. Naomi Carter stood near the center of the room in a dark blue evening gown, accepting congratulations she did not feel she had earned. At 51, she had become the most visible black woman in the American maritime technology industry. Carter Maritime employed nearly 3,000 people and built navigation systems used by commercial rescue fleets, coastal hospitals, and government emergency teams. Magazine profiles called her disciplined. Investors called her unshakable. Employees who knew her only from the quarterly broadcasts called her intimidating, though never where they believed she could hear. They were all describing the same armor. Naomi had learned young that some rooms forgave uncertainty in men and punished it in women. For a black woman, she had discovered, the margin was thinner still. Confidence could be called arrogance. Silence could be called hostility. A mistake that cost another executive a difficult afternoon could follow her for years. So she prepared for everything. She read every report. She remembered every name. She arrived early, left late, and never allowed anger to speak before judgment had finished its work. That night, however, judgment had brought her to a conclusion she could barely accept. For 11 weeks, internal auditor Rachel Bennett had been tracing unexplained shipments of Carter Maritime guidance processors. The equipment was legal when sold to approved domestic partners, but someone had routed hundreds of units through shell companies that vanished within days of receiving them. The final destinations were hidden behind coded manifests and falsified customs declarations. 3 days earlier, Rachel had found the authorization chain. It began with the digital signature of Charles Whitaker, Naomi's chief operating officer and oldest ally on the executive team. Charles had supported Naomi when the board doubted she was ready to lead. He had defended her expansion plan, stood beside her through a painful restructuring, and spent 9 years cultivating the manner of a man who believed loyalty should never need to announce itself. That afternoon, Rachel had slipped an encrypted drive into Naomi's hand and whispered, "If he discovers what we found, neither of us will be safe." Naomi had come to the gala because absence would have warned him. Rachel had come because Naomi refused to leave her alone. At 10:46 p.m., every light in the ballroom went out. The music stopped in the middle of a note. A glass shattered. Someone laughed nervously, believing it was a technical failure. Naomi knew better when she heard 3 sets of shoes moving quickly against the carpet. She reached for Rachel, but a man caught the young auditor by the arm. Another seized Naomi from behind. They wore the gray uniforms of Carter Maritime's contracted security division. Their movements were controlled, coordinated, and entirely wrong. Real guards would have guided guests toward the exits. These men moved directly toward 2 specific women. Naomi drove her heel down on the first man's foot, turned beneath his arm, and struck him hard enough to break his grip. The old training returned without invitation. Not as a memory, but as an order her body still understood. Before building a company, before the tailored jackets and earnings calls, Lieutenant Commander Naomi Carter had spent 12 years in the United States Navy. Most of her service record was ordinary enough to print. The rest belonged to a maritime special operations unit that recovered hostages and crews from vessels in places where governments preferred not to admit Americans were present. She had left after a rescue based on corrupted intelligence cost two good people their lives. For 16 years, she had never used those skills outside a training room. Now she used them to reach Rachel. Naomi pulled the second attacker off her auditor, swept his balance, and shoved Rachel toward the service corridor. A third man emerged from the darkness holding plastic restraints. He was not there to frighten them. He was there to transport them. "Run," Naomi said. They crossed the kitchen, while cooks and servers crowded near emergency lamps. Behind them, radios came alive. A male voice ordered all personnel to seal the southern exits. Naomi recognized the voice of Carter Maritime's security director, Owen Voss. That recognition hurt more than the man's hand around her arm had. Owen had been recommended by Charles. They escaped through a loading entrance and found Rachel's sedan in the employee lot. Naomi drove because Rachel's hands were shaking too badly to hold the keys. They left the hotel without headlights, turned through two service roads, and did not speak until the harbor disappeared behind warehouses. "They knew," Rachel whispered. "Charles knew." "We know Owen is involved," Naomi said. "We do not assume anything beyond the evidence." Rachel stared at her. "They just tried to take us. And fear is when assumptions become most expensive." The words sounded steady. Naomi's hands were steady too. Only her breathing betrayed her. Rachel had copied the evidence to a federal reporting portal, but the transmission required a second authorization key stored at Carter Maritime headquarters. Without it, the files were only an incomplete alert. With it, the package would include shipment records, audio fragments, and the names of the customs officials who had approved false declarations. They needed to reach the company before dawn. They never made it. 12 miles north of Charleston, blue lights appeared behind them. Naomi checked the speedometer. 54 in a 55-mile zone. Both taillights were working. She kept her hands visible and pulled onto the shoulder beneath the white glow of a closed gas station. "Let me speak," she told Rachel. The officer approached with one hand resting on his holster. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, and perhaps 43. His nameplate read, Mercer. He looked first at Naomi, then at Rachel, who was white, 29, and still wearing a torn cocktail dress. His entire interpretation of the scene formed in that glance. "Ma'am," he said to Rachel, "are you safe?" "No," Rachel answered. "Men tried to abduct us at Harbor Crest." Mercer's flashlight moved to Naomi's face. "Driver, step out of the vehicle." "Officer, we need you to contact the Charleston field office and Harbor Crest security." "I did not ask for a speech. Step out." Naomi saw the signs, his stance, his impatience, and the fixed certainty of a man who believed he had understood everything before the first question was complete. She stepped out slowly. Identification. Her purse had been lost in the ballroom. Her company credential was clipped inside the torn lining of her wrap. She reached toward it only after explaining what she was doing. Mercer seized her wrist and turned her against the hood. Rachel opened her door. "Stop. She is my CEO. She saved me." "Stay in the vehicle," Mercer shouted. "Her name is Dr. Naomi Carter. Call the company. Call anyone." Mercer found the credential, held it beneath his light, and gave a small, humorless smile. The photograph was Naomi's. The seal was authentic. The title beneath her name read, Chief Executive Officer. "This is what we're doing now?" he asked. "You expect me to believe you run Carter Maritime?" Naomi looked directly at him. "I expect you to verify it. People like you always have an impressive story ready." The sentence settled over the roadside with terrible clarity. Rachel stopped speaking for 1 second, stunned not by ambiguity but by its absence. Naomi had heard variations of those words in boardrooms, hotel lobbies, airport lounges, and once at the entrance to her own company. Usually they were polished until the speaker could deny their meaning. Mercer had not bothered with polish. "Officer," Naomi said quietly, "your camera is recording. Ask Ms. Bennett whether she is being held against her will. Then verify my credential." Mercer tightened his grip. "You do not give me instructions." A second cruiser arrived. Officer Daniel Ruiz stepped out, assessed the scene, and walked toward Rachel rather than Naomi. "Ma'am, tell me what happened." Rachel spoke quickly. She named the hotel, the gala, the attackers, and Naomi. She repeated that Naomi had rescued her. Ruiz turned toward Mercer. "Grant, she says there was an attempted abduction at Harbor Crest. She's frightened and confused." "She doesn't sound confused." Mercer lowered his voice. "Look at the vehicle. No identification. Torn clothing. One woman scared half to death, and the other one claiming she's a billionaire CEO. Use your eyes." Ruiz did use his eyes. He saw Rachel moving toward Naomi rather than away from her. He saw the bruising on both women's arms. He saw a corporate credential Mercer had made no attempt to scan. And he saw Naomi's expression, not panic, not aggression, but the controlled attention of someone memorizing every decision being made around her. "Let me call it in," Ruiz said. Mercer snatched the credential back. "I'm senior on scene." He handcuffed Naomi. Rachel began crying, not loudly, but with the helpless fury of someone watching the truth become irrelevant. "She saved my life," she repeated. "And I'm saving yours," Mercer said. He placed Naomi in the rear of his cruiser and ordered Ruiz to transport Rachel separately as a potential victim. During the drive, Naomi watched the dark highway pass through reinforced glass. She had spent a lifetime making herself undeniable, believing excellence could become a shield if she made it strong enough. Yet a stranger had looked at her skin, Rachel's fear, and an expensive credential, and decided the most impossible part of the scene was that a woman like Naomi might be exactly who she said she was. The humiliation was real. So was the anger. But beneath both, something older and more useful began assembling facts. Mercer had arrived less than 6 minutes after they left the main highway. He had known Rachel's name before Ruiz asked for it. And when he placed Naomi's credential into an evidence envelope, he did not write suspected forgery. He wrote property recovered. He was not merely prejudiced. He had been expecting them. At the county substation, Mercer separated the women. Naomi was placed in an interview room with 1 table, 3 chairs, and a camera mounted behind smoked plastic. Rachel was taken across the corridor. 40 minutes passed. Then Owen Voss entered the building. Naomi saw him through the narrow window in the door. He wore a clean suit rather than his security uniform. Mercer met him near the desk. They did not shake hands. Men trying to hide familiarity often avoided the ordinary gestures that would make them look natural. Owen handed Mercer a folder. Mercer glanced toward Naomi's room. Now she understood the architecture of the trap. The attackers at the hotel had failed to capture them, so Owen had used a cooperative officer to stop their vehicle. Mercer's prejudice made him useful because it supplied a believable explanation for conduct he had already agreed to perform. If challenged, he could say the scene looked suspicious. He could say Naomi was uncooperative. He could say he was protecting Rachel. Bias was not incidental to the conspiracy. It was camouflage. Ruiz entered Naomi's room at 1:18 a.m. and closed the door behind him. "Your credential is real," he said. "I know." He accepted the rebuke without defending himself. "Dispatch confirmed your identity. Mercer told them to hold the result because he believes your company account may be compromised." "Did dispatch confirm the incident at Harbor Crest?" "The hotel reported a power failure and a disturbance. Their security director says you assaulted 3 guards and abducted an employee named Rachel Bennett." Naomi leaned back slowly. "And Rachel?" She still says you saved her. Then why am I still in handcuffs? Ruiz looked toward the camera. Because Mercer ordered it. That is not an answer, Officer Ruiz. He looked ashamed. No, ma'am, it isn't. Naomi studied him. A good man's hesitation could do almost as much damage as a bad man's certainty. But shame, if honestly faced, could still become a door. Owen Voss is part of the group that tried to abduct us, she said. If he leaves with Rachel, she will disappear. If Mercer transfers me anywhere outside this building, I will disappear too. Ruiz's face changed. You need to call the FBI. Mercer controls the incident log. Then do not use the incident log. If you are wrong, I lose my badge. Naomi held his eyes. If I am right, and you do nothing, Rachel may lose far more. The corridor door opened. Mercer appeared. We're transferring Carter, he said. Where? Ruiz asked. Central intake. There's no transfer order. There will be. Naomi stood. Ask him why Owen Voss is here. Mercer stepped into the room. You are finished giving orders. No, Ruiz said. She isn't. It was not a dramatic declaration. His voice shook slightly. That made it matter more. Mercer stared at him. Move. Ruiz did not. For several seconds, the room held 3 people and the entire distance between obedience and duty. Then Rachel screamed from across the hall. Naomi moved first. She caught Mercer's wrist before his hand cleared his holster, turned inside his reach, and redirected him against the table without striking him. Ruiz pulled Mercer's weapon and stepped back in shock. Open the cuffs, Naomi said. Ruiz did. They reached the corridor as Owen dragged Rachel toward the rear exit. Naomi crossed the distance in seconds. Owen released Rachel and raised both hands, but Mercer shouted from behind them that Naomi was attacking an officer. No one moved. The desk sergeant had finally begun watching the body camera feed. He saw Mercer's first roadside stop. He heard Rachel's repeated statements. He heard the remark about people like you. He saw Naomi's identity confirmation arrive on the dispatch terminal 27 minutes before Mercer claimed it had not. Officer Mercer, the sergeant said, step away from the door. Mercer's face became very still. Owen ran. He made it through the rear exit and into a waiting vehicle. Ruiz called the plate while Naomi checked Rachel for injuries. A county unit located the vehicle abandoned 8 miles away. Owen was gone, but in his hurry he had left a phone beneath the passenger seat. The phone contained encrypted messages, location data, and a photograph of Rachel's sedan taken 20 minutes before Mercer stopped it. By 2:40 a.m., federal agents were on their way. Naomi could have stayed at the station and allowed them to take control. That was the reasonable choice. It was also the choice Charles Whitaker was counting on. At 3:05, Rachel received an automated board notification. An emergency meeting had been called for 6 a.m. Charles intended to declare Naomi medically incapacitated following a violent episode at the gala. Once appointed acting CEO, he could authorize the final overseas shipment and destroy the remaining internal audit archive. They had less than 3 hours. Special Agent Helen Park arrived at 3:22. Naomi gave her the evidence, the names, and the location of the second authorization key. Park listened without interruption. We can secure the building, she said, but entering a private corporate headquarters based on a partially transmitted file will take time. How much? More than you have. Naomi looked at Rachel. Can you access the audit archive from inside? Yes. The authorization key is in the compliance vault beside the boardroom. Park understood. You want to walk into the meeting. I want Charles to believe his plan is still working until the moment it cannot. Ruiz stood near the door. There is something else. He placed a printed call log on the table. Mercer had communicated with Owen 17 times in the preceding month. 3 calls coincided with traffic stops involving Black Carter Maritime employees. Each driver had been questioned about company access, schedules, and executive travel. None had been charged. Mercer had been gathering information while disguising it as routine enforcement. The conspiracy had grown inside the shelter of racial profiling because the victims were people he assumed no one powerful would believe. Naomi read the names twice. "They will be believed now," she said. At 5:41 a.m., Charles Whitaker stood at the head of Carter Maritime's boardroom and described Naomi as unstable. He spoke with sorrow rather than accusation. It was one of his gifts. He could turn betrayal into reluctant duty and ambition into sacrifice. "Dr. Carter has carried tremendous pressure for many years," he told the 7 directors. "Last night, that pressure appears to have resulted in a serious break from reality. She attacked members of our security staff and forcibly removed an employee from company protection." On the screen behind him was a still image from Mercer's body camera, Naomi handcuffed beside the cruiser. Charles allowed the picture to remain long enough to do its work. "Local law enforcement took her into custody," he continued. "For the protection of this company and its employees, I am asking the board to invoke the emergency succession clause." One director, Evelyn Brooks, frowned. "Has anyone spoken directly with Naomi?" "She is being evaluated." "That was not my question." Charles lowered his eyes with practiced patience. "No." The boardroom doors opened. Naomi entered wearing the same torn blue gown beneath a borrowed gray coat. Rachel walked beside her. Agent Park and 2 federal officers remained outside, out of sight. Charles stopped speaking. Naomi walked to her usual chair but did not sit. "You were saying something about my state of mind." "Naomi." Charles found his warmth quickly. "Thank God you're safe. Please do not use God to decorate a lie." The room went silent. Naomi placed Owen's recovered phone on the table. Rachel connected her laptop to the boardroom system and inserted the authorization key she had retrieved from the vault. The first file showed the shipment trail. The second showed Charles's approval signature. The third contained messages between Charles, Owen, and Mercer. They discussed the gala, Rachel's vehicle, and the roadside location where Mercer would intercept them if the abduction team failed. Then, Rachel played the audio. Charles's voice filled the room. "If Carter resists, let Mercer handle her. He knows how to make the arrest look ordinary. The girl must be separated from her before she talks to anyone." No one looked at Naomi when the recording ended. They looked at Charles. For 9 years, he had occupied that room as a trusted man. It took 41 seconds of audio to reveal what trust had concealed. He recovered enough to say, "This material can be fabricated." "Then you will welcome an independent examination," Naomi replied. Agent Park entered. Charles's shoulders dropped by less than an inch. It was the only confession his body allowed. Federal agents arrested him and secured the company servers. Owen was found that afternoon at a marina south of Savannah, attempting to board a private vessel. The phone evidence tied him to the abduction team, the illegal shipments, and the corrupted intelligence operation that had ended Naomi's final Navy mission 16 years earlier. The discovery did not restore the people Naomi had lost. Truth rarely returned what betrayal had taken. But it gave grief a name, and sometimes a name was the first boundary around an old wound. Officer Grant Mercer was arrested before sunrise. His body camera supplied the clearest evidence against him. His words, his refusal to verify Naomi's identity, and the concealed dispatch confirmation dismantled every explanation he tried to offer. The county investigation reopened the earlier traffic stops. 3 employees testified that Mercer had humiliated them, searched their vehicles without cause, and asked questions unrelated to any traffic violation. One was a 64-year-old engineer who had helped design coastal rescue systems. Another was a single father in payroll. The third was a young security technician who had quit the company because he believed he was being followed. For years, each had carried the private suspicion that speaking would only deepen the harm. Now their accounts became part of the case. Daniel Ruiz testified too. He did not describe himself as courageous. He told the review board that he had seen the truth early and had taken too long to act. Officer Mercer made the arrest, he said, but my silence gave him room to continue. I want that included in the record. Naomi heard about the statement weeks later. She did not forgive him in some grand public gesture. Forgiveness was not a ceremony she owed anyone. But she wrote him a short note. Accountability begins when a person stops editing his own role in the harm. Keep going. 6 months later, Carter Maritime held its annual foundation dinner again. The company no longer used Owen's security division. Naomi had built an independent oversight office with authority to investigate executive misconduct, discriminatory treatment, and retaliation without reporting through the ordinary chain of command. Rachel Bennett became its first director after an external selection panel ranked her highest among 12 candidates. Naomi refused to call the promotion a reward. Rachel had earned it long before anyone important noticed. The county adopted new verification and supervisory review rules following Mercer's case. Policies did not erase prejudice, and Naomi was careful never to pretend they did. But rules could narrow the space in which prejudice operated without consequence. Records could make denial harder. Honest officers could be required to intervene before hesitation became complicity. On the evening of the new gala, Naomi arrived early. She walked alone through the service corridor where the attack had begun. The lights were bright. Kitchen doors opened and closed. Somewhere beyond the wall, musicians tuned their instruments. Rachel found her there. For a moment, neither woman spoke. I used to think strength meant never needing anyone to stand beside me, Naomi said. Rachel smiled faintly. You did stand beside me. That night, yes. Naomi looked down the ordinary corridor. But afterward, you stood beside me too. Rachel reached for her hand. Naomi accepted it. They entered the ballroom together. Not as rescuer and victim, not as CEO and employee, but as two women who had carried different pieces of the truth through a night designed to silence them. The guests rose when Naomi stepped onto the stage. She waited until the room settled. There are people, she began, who believe dignity belongs only to those whose authority they recognize. They mistake a title for worth, a uniform for character, and prejudice for instinct. Last October, a police officer looked at me and decided I could not possibly be the woman named on my identification. He was wrong about my title. But the deeper wrong was believing my title should have been necessary for me to receive fairness. The room became still. Justice does not become important because the person in handcuffs is a CEO. It matters because the person in handcuffs is human. In the rear of the ballroom stood 3 Carter Maritime employees whose old traffic stops had been reopened. Naomi spoke their names. She spoke the names of the 2 people lost on her final Navy mission. She spoke Rachel's name last. Not because Rachel had been weakest that night, because she had refused to let fear rewrite what she knew. After the dinner, Naomi returned briefly to the terrace overlooking the harbor. The water was calm, reflecting a long line of lights from the city. For years, she had believed survival depended on becoming impossible to dismiss. She had built achievements like walls and carried composure like a passport into rooms that questioned whether she belonged. But a wall could keep out comfort as effectively as danger. Rachel joined her without speaking. Naomi did not straighten, perform confidence, or say that she was fine. Stay for a minute, she said. Rachel stood beside her. Below them, the harbor moved patiently against the shore. Behind them waited a company still repairing what betrayal had broken. Ahead lay hearings, trials, and years of work that no single victory could complete. Yet Naomi no longer confused unfinished justice with failed justice. Some changes arrived like thunder. Others began when one person refused to repeat a lie, when another admitted that silence had caused harm, or when a woman whom the world had tried to reduce to a stereotype walked back into her own boardroom carrying the truth. Naomi had spent much of her life proving that she belonged in powerful rooms. That night, beneath the quiet Charleston sky, she finally understood something greater. Her dignity had never depended on their permission.